Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, we have a returning champion back on the show. After way too long, over 2 years, there couldn't be a better time to talk about media, politics, race, horses, all kinds of stuff, and Fireball. The great and powerful Soledad O'Brien is back. Welcome back to Independent Americans, my friend.
Nice to see you. Yeah, well, it was a pandemic in the middle of that 2 years, so I feel like I have a good excuse for not seeing you. How is everything? How you been?
It's we're living, and
Wanted for
the last time I saw you, we were in person. It was July 2019. We were in the classic.
Freaking find that has an impossible address. I remember cursing your name. I'm like, where is this location?
Well, I hope it was worth it because
it was, very much.
We did have you had the best answer to the favorite drink question we've ever had. You said Fireball was your favorite drink, which shocked millions around the world.
Yes. Well, I do love Fireball. It's so sweet. You know what I like sweet drinks. So every wine has to be sweet. Every drink has to be a girly, cocktaily sweet. And Fireball is basically like they call it cinnamon whiskey, but it's really just sugar and sweet. And so I didn't realize that Fireball was a ridiculous drink. When I would ask for Fireball, people would say, yeah, I don't have that, but we've got Jägermeister. I'm like, oh my God. Like, I know that's terrible. Is Fireball as bad as Jägermeister that you're just offering it to me? My children, by the way, absolutely horrified. But I've kind of moved off. I've had a bunch of, I'd say shifts during this pandemic. Sometimes wine and then sometimes gin and tonic, usually in the summer. I'm back into then red wine and then white wine and then full on cocktails, cosmopolitans, which they're too hard to make, honestly. So I've left Fireball for a little bit, but someone gave me this year for Christmas a thing of Fireball this big, and they replaced the label with my face. Obviously, spokes lady gig for Fireball.
This is a tremendous sponsorship opportunity for the makers of Fireball. And I will tell you, I thought of you because I've been teaching at my alma mater this past semester, and more than once I saw empty bottles of Fireball on the ground on the campus of Amherst College.
I think it speaks badly to the reputation of Fireball, because my kids will take pictures when they see a little bottle of Fireball on the ground, and they'll send to the family chat, "Mom, are you here?"
But at least it was, it's popular at a very prestigious academic institution. So, it's everywhere. And you have been everywhere. You have been a Fireball on the political media landscape. You've probably added 1 million followers on Twitter since last time we talked. You're doing documentaries. You're doing HBO. And I think you're one of the most important critics in the country on the media. So I want to talk to you about media and politics and everything that's happening. But maybe bringing it back to center, because it has been so long. Where are you? A question I ask all of our guests, Soledad. Where are you and how are you?
I am fantastic. I mean, I'm very stressed about the world because I think 2 years into COVID, it feels like people are just highly stressed and tightly wound. And it reminds me actually a lot of the time period after Katrina, where just it's been hard. And so everybody's just like their heart is in their throat all the time. And it feels like that same time. I think people are just obviously, all of us, done with the pandemic, and on a tightly wound. I am in Harlem, New York. I moved here in November from Chelsea. I've lived in Chelsea for 20 years. But, my husband and I sat around and thought about, where do we want to spend the next, I'm going to guess I get another 40 years, but probably more like 25. And I love that Harlem is really a community. And so, if you support a restaurant, it's a local restaurant. If you hire people, you're supporting local people. So I really, really love that. So I was very excited to move up here. We moved in November, and then we spend the winters in Florida. Although someone said I'm a snowbird, which sounds like a really little old lady. I was like, oh God, no, don't call it that. But I am a person who likes warm weather. I am a delicate flower. So we moved, unpacked, and then I went right down to Florida because I really hate to be cold.
Well, so that puts you in the middle of all kinds of interesting things related to media, from Ron DeSantis to Eric Adams. I actually really would love to hear your thoughts, De Blasio is finally gone. This is, I think that the mayor of New York City is such a national, even international position. Adams is now, been there less than a month. He's already making headlines. He's like a walking soundbite, but not always for the best, right? I mean, I've seen Eric Adams. I've known Eric Adams for a long time. He's kind of being introduced to the rest of the country and the rest of the world. What are your thoughts on the end of De Blasio and the beginning of Adams?
I welcome a new mayor, and I'm always willing to give new people a little bit of time. I do think some of the things that he said, and even when he was running for the mayorship, I think it just sounds like a goofball. You're sort of like, gosh, and I get it. I think people like to spin that as off the cuff, and he says what he means, but, again, who knows? Sometimes I think it just sounds straight idiotic, but again, willing to give. He's new, and I think it's a tough job, and I wish that maybe I'm hearkening back to a day that just didn't really exist. I'm making it up in my head, where people who were leaders were spokespeople, right? They understood the power of their words. And so when every time they stepped up to the mic, they understood they're not just answering a question, that they're, especially in a big city like New York, you're right. It's a national gig, even though it's a New York City mayor. I wish we had more thoughtful leaders at times. I mean, so many, I can't think of his exact quotes, but just go ahead and Google it. You're like, ugh, what a freaking goofball. But, it's been a month, so maybe it'll improve. I'm certainly hopeful. I think certainly De Blasio and a lot of these guys mostly, I just wish they understood. I remember when De Blasio early on in the pandemic, went to the gym, and you're literally in a black suburban. Everybody knows what is that gene where you think that that you can do whatever you want and it doesn't matter. There's a rule for you and there's a rule for other people. I find that so distressing. And honestly, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I don't care. I just wish leaders would lead more and really put more time and effort and energy into the people that they're leading. So I have not seen anything great from Adams. I haven't seen anything terrible from him yet. I think some of the things he said, it's goofball is the best word that I come up with. You know him better than me. You tell me. What do you think?
I think Eric Adams is shoot, ready, aim, rather than ready, aim, shoot. He loves grabbing. He loves grabbing headlines. He often throws stuff out there without thinking it through, like when he said he was going to get paid in crypto before there was even a process to pay government officials in crypto. He keeps saying my business is in New York in the same way Trump talks about the military being his. So I think he's going to step in it a lot. I think he's way ahead of his skis. He's feeling it. And, he keeps talking about New York swagger, and we definitely need that. But it feels like it's going to be a bumpy couple of years.
Right? Like, listen, we're done with the pandemic. New York swag. You're like,
yeah.
Swagger and people dying from the pandemic, they're not even in the same it makes no sense. And listen, I've been a New Yorker for my whole entire life, although I'm a Long Islander, so people don't count that as a New Yorker, but we kind of count it. But even a New York City resident for a very long time. Like, spare me with the swagger bullshit. Like, just lead people to helping a city that actually people are scared, they're stressed, their jobs for many people are on the line, they haven't worked consistently. Like, help with that. Be inspiring. Why is that so hard? Why is that so hard?
I love that you asked that question, because leadership is the thing that I don't think people think through enough. And you've been great pulling the aperture out a little bit. You've been great at calling out the media, even especially since I talked to you last time. You've got, people you love to keep an eye on. You love to bang on Politico. You're calling out the New York Times.
For Christmas, I got a Politico mug as a gift.
You got a Politico mug for Christmas.
Yeah, it's in my cabinet. Someone said, "Here, I bought you a mug for Christmas."
So what I'd love to do, because you have your own company, I'm trying to create an independent media company. We're disruptors. We're also media critics. I'd love to have you on every so often, just to kind of go around the horn and talk about the state of the media, which you opine on Twitter so often. But can we maybe pull the aperture out? And we've got a year into Biden. Trump is rising. COVID's. How do you evaluate? And I can't say the media, right? And I don't want to be over monolithic about that. But how do you look at the landscape, and what do you see as good parts, bad parts changing? How do you give your strategic overview of where the American media is right now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of challenges. And the challenge that really was presented with Donald Trump, where it was really sort of shown full force, was how do you deal with perpetual misinformation and disinformation? Listen, I've interviewed a zillion government officials, elected officials. They lie like rugs, but usually they exaggerate, right? People don't out and out just completely bullshit you. And so I think one of the things that's been very hard for the media to deal with is, one, just people out and out lying. What they're saying is just not true. So you can spend a lot of your interview just trying to chase down a fact. And then how do you think about platforming people who lie, even in the basic thing of is Biden president, right? Which we would say, like, that's kind of a basic question. If you think of the number of people who've appeared on, like, Meet the Press, who really, hedge when they're asked that question, or have tried to contest the election results with absolutely no grounding whatsoever, it's kind of scary because the media should be the ones who are holding people accountable in a way. And yet they're really struggling with what to do with those people because they want the clicks, they want the eyeballs. They're really competing with social media. So I think that's a really, really giant problem. And, and also I think for the media, how do you relive the glory days of Trump? When you have someone who is a flamethrower and over the top and is talking about injecting what was it, cleaner, something in your blood to clean out COVID. I mean, the number of idiotic, just really ignorant things that the president said a zillion times is, I can't even count them. There are too many. But but you try to do this sense of balance. Well, Trump did this, Biden does that. And it's very challenging because I think, how do you compare someone who spent $1 zillion golfing with somebody who goes home to the grave of his wife and his kid? But they try really hard. And so I think the media is reaching, and I think the tone has really shifted, right? The tone is constantly this, how do we find the salacious tone? Because we're, again, competing with social media. The conversation on Twitter has to pop. It has to stick out. We need people to click on it. And so everything is a bit over the top. When you have a guy who, I like Biden fine. I'm not a fan, not a fan, don't care. I just would like a leader who is responsible and knows what he's doing. So I'm not a Biden cheerleader, and I'm not rooting against anybody. Very rarely do I root against people, because I think you're ultimately rooting against your country and you're rooting against your fellow Americans. But I think the media really is looking for that Trump high that was, listen, the number of reporters who every time Trump would insult them, right, that became part of their Twitter bio because it was great. It was cool. Those things are kind of pathetic and sad. So I'm very disappointed about the state of the media. I think Politico is terrible. A good example is, I'll give you a good CNN example, which I was tweeting about earlier, which is, they talked about President Trump's rebranding. But, over the weekend, the president said white people cannot get the vaccine. Like, that's an insane thing to say. One, it's just untrue. But also, like, who says that? Like, what is the mindset of a person who is telling America in a televised speech that white people cannot get the vaccine? It has such a thread of white nationalism. I mean, it's just so scary. And the idea that days later, CNN's talking about the rebranding of Trump, as opposed to saying, like, who the fuck actually says white people can't get the vaccine? That's just crazy. Like, the media should be focused on these things that are just utterly, clearly lies, and they really struggle to do that. So they have to think of other ways to grab an audience, and I think that does not do a service. At one point, also, they're thin-skinned. Geez, the people at the New York Times, my God, that's the thinnest skinned group of people I've ever seen in my life. If you criticize them, they're like, well, if America doesn't know about it, it's not our fault. You're like, actually,
can we stay on that? Because I want to. So one of the things that it feels like, especially traditional media, is having kind of an identity crisis. Like they personality-driven models are rising. Every reporter from the New York Times has their own personality and their own Twitter feed and their own position, in addition to their reporting, which right. I feel like kind of undermines the legitimacy of it. But can we maybe go around the horn? I saw that you were celebrating nonprofit journalism, right? Which there seems to be an investment. And then you've got the rise of the renegades, the Barstools, and the Joe Rogans, right? And where are these other folks going to go? But can we go around to a couple? Let me throw out some medias and just get your reaction. So, state of affairs, right? CNN has now got Chris Wallace from Fox. MSNBC seems to be going all in on the Democratic Party, hiring Simone Sanders to host, a show. Fox is giving Jesse Waters a show, which is, Baby Tucker Carlson. Let's just talk about those three. what are they right now? What is CNN? What is MSNBC? What is Fox?
Utterly unwatchable. I literally don't watch any of them. I think cable, it doesn't provide any information. And I think for people who are looking for kind of understanding policy and information and understanding the world as opposed to having a point of view fed to them, I just think it's unwatchable. The low point for me when I really turned off CNN was when Chris Cuomo, was on with his brother, the governor, and literally the conversation was, I am not making this up for people who haven't seen it. Who does mom love more? I mean, I'm not joking. That was the conversation. And I remember thinking, this is just an embarrassment. Like and it's a dog and pony show. And there's a lot of actually important questions that you could ask the governor at a time of crisis in the city and the state. And this is just a waste. Like, why is this joke on air? It's ridiculous. And so to me, again, I think you're right. I think it's, how do we turn this thing into an event? And then of course it backfires because suddenly it gets messy and then you can't interview your brother when it was fine to interview your brother. And then it all ends with everybody losing their job, blah, blah, blah. But it's just messy and irrelevant. I think PBS is doing a really good job, and PBS has always kind of hit it right down the middle, but I think they're very informative. We've tried to do with the show that I do, which is our syndicated show, matter of fact, like, here's the policy. Our show, we taped it today. Here's what this new legislation that doesn't allow for surprises in your billing. Like, here's what it does. Here, let me explain it. This is who it helps. Here's where it falls short. Here's the big picture. I mean, doesn't have to be sexy. I think people actually are very interested in understanding what's coming down the pike. So when journalists get a little hot under the collar because people don't understand issues or they believe misinformation, yeah, I think you are personally responsible. You are literally personally responsible for the fact that people think critical race theory is taught in middle school. That is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. But if you were to go out on the street and poll people, they would tell you that. Yeah. And here we are.
I mean, I wonder if there's a point now where maybe people are watching Succession and they're finally understanding the difference between people on air and the puppet masters, right? And so the Cuomo example, it's no secret. Chris is a friend of mine. I used to back him up on the radio. I'm on CNN.
To me.
Yeah, I mean, I was his backup on for a little while, one of his many backups on Sirius XM, and the way I saw it, obviously, what he was doing, CNN and many others deemed inappropriate, but it was kind of like CNN trying to have both, right? They're great with Cuomo and his brother when the ratings are great, and that show is fun. But then when something else happens and the guy, no surprise in my view, stands up for his brother, goes to his brother, then he's out, and CNN just keeps on trucking. So like, at what point do we pull up, right, and really hold CNN proper accountable and hold, other. I'm glad you bring up PBS as an example because I go to PBS for information. I go to C-SPAN for information, but that's like eating your oatmeal when when the rest of it's gummy bears and candy all day. So,
I think the job of someone saying this is not okay does not lie with Chris Cuomo, right? It lies with executives who say that one time was funny because your brother's the governor, and now we're done. And in fact, if anybody has to interview the governor, we're going to bring in Susie here, and you're going to toss to Susie. Susie will do the interview. You'll deconstruct that interview with Susan. Like, that's how it works in.
Well, sometimes you covered sports for a long time. Sometimes you gotta take the player out of the equation, right? Like sometimes the quarterback wants to go in and keep playing, and the coach has got to say, "Hey, bud, you're out. You're hurting the team," right? And that would have been a situation where. Chris Cuomo, this is not an interview you should do. We'll get somebody else for this part, take you out of the mix. But, Cuomo is now in many ways been held accountable. Who in proper has been held accountable, right? And no one at Fox is being held accountable. And it seems like this machine is bouncing all around. Simultaneously, you've got the rise of Joe Rogan, right, who maybe gets 20 times what CNN has been getting, maybe 30 times what MSNBC has been getting. Can you talk about him? Because you're a media watcher. He delves into a lot of cultural points and misinformation. What Soledad O'Brien on Joe Rogan? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, Soledad O'Brien has never actually listened to an entire Joe Rogan or watched, really, because, of course, they shoot it as well. I only listened to the clips and, I think he's got a lot of misinformation, but I understand why he's successful. It's very conversational. I think the topics that he picks, I think a lot of people really like kind of the insight that he brings, even as they're okay with the misinformation. Like, yeah, that's stupid. That's not true. But they still enjoy him as the personality. I think what ends up happening is that people really look at that as the model. Again, back to Chris Cuomo and CNN, you say, this is what we need. We need our host to be doing this too. You know, when I worked at CNN a million years ago, they used to send me home with DVDs of Fox and Friends. Like, here's what they're doing. You need to figure. And I was like, right, but I'm covering the number of Americans who died in Afghanistan, and they're doing a conga line. I'm like, I'm not sure how to do the show that they're doing with what we think is important to cover. But for a long time, a lot of people have said, how do we get the engagement of the Fox audience? How do you get the engagement of the Joe Rogan listener / viewer? So I think it makes a lot of sense. And all you need to do is look at those numbers. And if you don't really care about the content or the quality of the content or the accuracy of the content, you say, this is amazing. This is great. Look at those numbers. And the same with, again, as I always say, cable is competing with social media. Look at the number of viewers, look at the number of followers, you know, and how do they get them? Well, you're over the top, you're extra mean, you're divisive, you make shit up. I mean, that's kind of the answer, and nobody cares, right? And whatever you do, do not ever back down. Do not ever apologize.
Well, and now Spotify's in the similar position because they hired Joe Rogan. And they knew what they were getting, and they paid a lot of money, and they're making a lot of money, and they've got their employees who are pissed off because he's spreading misinformation and he's transphobic. But you knew what you were getting into. So I think the business motivations here are not, in my opinion, explored enough. The media doesn't explore itself enough unless they're blowing each other up, which they love to do. But let me ask you.
Here's how those meetings went. Yeah, but you see, he's getting 20 million people. Yeah. But I know he does that, but he's getting 20 million people. Yeah, but he's getting 20. Like, that's literally how that goes. And
so, can I ask you, Soledad, what is you watch this? What is good? Like, what's an alternative? Like, who are the farm team people, or like the up and comers, or the off the radars? You know, like we talk about PBS. I tell my students, watch NewsHour. Right? There's stuff out there that might not be as fun, but it's good information. What do you see as really good and maybe up and coming that's not on people's radar? It could be a person or a paper.
And listen, now you have a lot of journalists. I think the Texas Tribune is amazing. And again, all you have to do is subscribe, get it online. Really, really interesting for coverage of Texas. Why would you watch, people at MSNBC covering Texas when you could actually go to the Texas Tribune? Right. I think there's tons of, I think really where the failures are in politics. And politics, which used to be used to be like this. Let's go to Bob at the White House. Bob? And Bob would give you, Bob at the White House. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. That was it. Like, they would give you this context. Well, now you have a bunch of these White House correspondents. And again, it's like they've become famous. And I think their coverage is outsized for what their coverage should be. There's a lot that happens in the world that should be reported on and doesn't have to be framed as politics, because I think the way we frame politics, New York Times does it, Washington Post does it, Wall Street Journal certainly does it, MSNBC, CNN, Politico, right? It's always a game. He won, he lost versus, right, but what happened? Did the American people win or lose? How do we think about this issue? Explain it that way versus did Biden get, did this person get? It's not just about the president per se. It's about the legislation and what happens to human beings who have a vested interest in getting health care or getting laws about their safety pass. I mean, it's such a weird way to frame things. It's actually a very dude way, by the way, to frame shit. Like, it's a football who won and who lost. And I think there's a lot, who had the zinger in a debate is always so stupid, because it's, like, who cares? It's not about the zinger. It's really about, like, well, did the thing that they talk about, can you freaking fund that? Because if you can't fund it, then let's stop giving him points for what he said.
Well, before we went on the air, defund NPR was trending on Twitter. Because, there's attacks that are constant there, and we don't have a BBC type model, right? That would give us, something. I'm glad you brought up the Texas Tribune. I think that's a great example. I think there are others.
I don't agree with everything, but I think the Atlantic is really good. I like the Wall Street Journal. They shouldn't pretend that they're not conservative leaning, but that's okay. I think you're conservative leaning. I think that there's lots of brilliant writers at the Wall Street Journal. Washington Post is often good. Sometimes their politics stuff is messy. Tons of great journalists at the New York Times. Few in politics. Many of those people are just awful and so thin-skinned. My God, they just ugh.
Can I ask you, Soledad, because we just came out of Martin Luther King weekend, which is kind of like, I think there are these touchstones like Martin Luther King weekend, 9/11, maybe like Memorial Day, right? Where like everybody throws up their standard graphic, right? Like I love black people, right? Or like I love veterans, right? And everybody does it, right? You got every congressman running down to the they're all running down to the MLK Memorial to get a quick video, and then they run back and do 20 other things. Can you just break down the last couple of days? Because for me, it's kind of one of those high points of hypocrisy and just madness. But what is your takeaway from that last couple of days?
The media would do a better job, and they really don't. And I know I'm being broad, but there's very few people who will say, well, this person was talking about, the march to Selma and even did this and this and this. At the same token, they voted against this very thing that they're raving about. Like that is just basic hypocrisy coverage 101. It's not even hard. So yeah, the number of politicians who, hashtag I have a dream, hashtag MLK, hashtag, it's just, I think there's a real value in saying this person is espousing something, is championing something that they don't believe. This person is a hypocrite. Now, vote for them, don't vote for them, whatever you want, but you should understand where they stand, what they're really doing. And I do find that very frustrating. That again, people will do a good job of saying, here's what so-and-so said. And it happens actually, I think, with a lot of veterans issues. Listen, we need to support veterans. And then literally they go and vote against those things that actually would support homeless vets or support veterans who want to have some funding to go to higher education. Like they're very rarely, and I think the media, you need them to connect the dots and say, this person says they're for vets, but at every turn they're against vets. So let's talk about that and not say, here's what they said, because that quote is just hypocritical.
And it's not a parallel, but an observation that, there's so much about us without us. Right. And you look across the spectrum and, there are so few veterans, more now, but there are very few veterans that sit in anchor chairs that have been, that are running media companies. And similarly, you're great at calling out people of color across the media spectrum. And it seems like some people are trying to fix that. Right. But it's still very messy and still feels like a lot of tokenism. Right.
That's what people do. Right. The minute they talk about anything with a veteran, it becomes an American's veterans. Tonight, we're going to talk about serving America. John Doe is an American hero. Right. And you're like, well, then maybe hire John Doe. Like that might actually be a really good strategy. If you really think John Doe is an American hero, freaking give John Doe a job, fund his company. Like I believe, and maybe I'm losing my mind, but I believe in like calling that out and say, you should know while they're saying this, on the other hand, they're doing this. And I find it really frustrating. I think it's just not okay.
Is there a new model emerging? We had Adam Kinzinger on last week, and he's kind of, they're all doing their own podcasts, right? They're doing Trump light, right? Whether it's Crenshaw or Kinzinger or Beta, like they're all doing, it seems like a lot of politicians are trying to create their own media companies as a way to have a more powerful voice or kind of a place to hang out in between political things, right? But it seems like it's more possible from an infrastructure standpoint, from a reach standpoint, because you can just go on Twitter. You and I are examples of that, right? Like our Twitter feeds have an impact. People watch them. We can go around. If we can't get on air, we can still have something to say on things. Can you talk about that kind of collision of political figures and media things?
It's what I like about social media, right? You get to work around the gatekeepers who say, yeah, not you. We've decided you're too annoying, you're too frustrating, or we're just not it, or you don't toe the party line. And so I think it's great. Of course, you've reached a critical mass. And one of the problems with podcasts is there are a lot of them, and some of them are super boring, and politicians are often super boring in their podcasts. So, I think that I don't know that it's ultimately fantastically helpful to somebody to host a podcast versus just getting airtime. But yeah, I actually, it's one of the things I love about social media, which I also find very frustrating, that social media, generally speaking, right, is that you just get to work around, you get to have your opinion, you get to say, hey, we're talking about this, and if you're interested and you're not a Russian bot, you get to join me and weigh in and have this conversation at this day. Or here's a picture of my dog, and I think this dog is cute, and if you are interested in my dog, then you can like my picture. So there's something very appealing to me about working around it. But I do think you're right. I think for a lot of politicians, it's a thing to do when you don't necessarily have a thing to do. And listen, more politicians could do a better job about building their outreach. I think often politicians don't really reach out in an
Yeah.
effective way.
As
They
as
to be the social media manager, but they don't necessarily like one-on-one communicate with people. And I think there's something really great about that.
Well, as a show called Independent Americans, one of the things that I want to try to do is give more oxygen to candidates that are saying no to all of the above, right? Because so many of them feel like they have to just bite their lip and pick a party. And now seems like a time when Americans are uniquely sick of the status quo in media, sick of the status quo in political parties. And I hope that independent, truly independent media model and independent politics can kind of converge. I don't know if you see that or not. But the other part that's converging, I can't have you on and not ask you. This is like a high point of sports and politics too, right? You've got, you've got everything from Aaron Rodgers to Kyrie Irving. Super Bowl's coming, NFL playoffs. We've got tennis now involved, right? Djokovic won't get the shot. Any observations or predictions as we go into this?
I'm a correspondent for Real Sports, and it keeps us very, very busy. I love covering sports because I like the stakes and I love the stories. I never thought of myself as a sports reporter, but of course, if you work for Real Sports, you are. But I wouldn't tell you that I know my husband played tennis at a high level, but I wouldn't tell you that I know the ins and outs of tennis. But I love the personalities and I love the debates and I love the power struggles that happen. So yeah, I think reporting on sports is absolutely phenomenal. And literally being a correspondent for Real Sports is the best possible gig in TV, I'd say, but of course HBO would say it's not TV, it's HBO. But it's amazing. It's fascinating, and and it takes you everywhere. It takes you to people who are some random kid who's just playing, some professional athlete who made $1 zillion last year. I mean, it's people who you never heard of, people who you hear of every single night. I absolutely love that gig. I don't know where it's going, but again, boldface name with a platform. And again, I think for a lot of these guys, whatever you do, don't back down. That seems to be the model. I always thought that Mitt Romney created it when he was running for failed presidential bid. I remember asking him, he said to me, literally quote, he'd said something like, "We don't care about poor people," was part of the quote. I'm like, he was doing the victory run after winning Florida. And I said, "You don't care about poor people?" Like, that sounds very weird. Like I had my last question, but I'm like, hang on, I got to ask you another one. And instead of saying, "Soledad, you know what I mean. Of course I care about poor people, but we need to invest in the middle class." Like a normal human being would say that. He said, he just doubled down. And he was really the candidate that was the candidate of the double down, right? Like you can never, ever, ever go back and say, "Let me clarify. Here's what I'm talking about." So when people talked about Etch-a-Sketch, you just shake it and start over. Like literally, that's kind of how they saw it. The American people weren't buying that brand of BS, but I think it was a real weakness to think that was, you could sell it that way.
Would you ever run? You got folks who are going in and out of media. Maya Wiley went from media to running for mayor. There's an open governor's spot here. Would you ever run for office?
I'd stab myself in the eye with a fork. I can't imagine a more thankless, miserable job where you'd have to sell your soul daily in order to get anything done. I love running a production company. We had 16 employees, and I like everybody's on the same page to go a certain direction. And if there's friction, we all believe in what we're trying to get to versus people who I think are just trying to undermine systems. And so, no, I'd never. Literally, someone was trying to ask me to run for something, and I was like, "You have lost your mind. Never, ever, ever, never."
Well, the New York governor's race is wide open, and I know you like taking shots at DeSantis. I can think of nothing more fun than watching you on a debate stage with Ron DeSantis. So I can at least hope for it when I'm drinking my Fireball in a salute to you. I know you've got wine this time. Thank you for all you're doing to call bullshit, to throw punches.
Years, have me on more than every 3 years.
All right, let's do it gladly. I would love to do that. In the meantime, I'm going to enjoy the pictures of the dogs and the horses. And I just got to tell you, as somebody who is an activist, I like seeing you take shots at people and get under their skin. It's important. I think it's important.
Like, yeah, am I don't know. Every so often someone will say, you're an activist. And I'm like, because I think racism is bad. Yeah, I guess. I mean, like, is that an activist? Because I think your elected officials should be accountable and not be liars. Does that make you an activist? Because you think reporters should report accurately and not allow misinformation and shouldn't elevate things that are fictional? Is that an activist?
It
No,
is.
that's just good journalism and trying to educate people about what's really happening. So yeah, that makes me mad.
Well, whatever it is, I'm grateful for it, and I'm glad to see your reach expanding. Thank you for always being so generous with your time with me and with everything we're doing. And Real Sports is still one of the best TV shows of all time, and it's just the best of what everything can be. So thank you for that. Until then, we will continue to watch all the fireworks and the fireballs. And I thank you for all of your leadership, and I will toast to you. Stay vigilant, my friend.
Cheers. Have a great night.
Thank you.